There's a psychological phenomenon that researchers have documented for decades, and almost nobody discusses it in plain, straightforward language. When a person with extremely high emotional sensitivity finally decides they are done, the outcome is not what anyone expects. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's not the kind of ending that gives you warning signs or time to prepare. It's a silence so complete, so permanent, so utterly self-contained that the people on the receiving end of it often describe the experience as the most unsettling thing that has ever happened to them. Not because something exploded, but because something simply stopped. And what stopped was the most quietly powerful force most of them had ever had access to. This is the story of what that force actually is, what it costs the people who carry it, and what happens to everyone who never understood its value until it was already gone. Pay close attention here, because what you're about to hear isn't motivation. It isn't comfort. It's a precise psychological explanation of something most people experience, but almost nobody truly understands, including the people living inside it every single day. Let's start with the core misunderstanding that creates every single problem in these kinds of relationships. Most people, when they hear the word sensitive, picture fragility. They picture someone who cries easily, who takes things personally, who needs to be handled with extra care. That image is not just incomplete, it is almost perfectly backwards. The most emotionally sensitive people you will ever encounter in your life are not fragile. They are structurally complex in a way that most people never develop. Their emotional system is not a weakness in the architecture. It is the architecture itself. And what that architecture does automatically, involuntarily, from the time they were very small children, is collect data. Not surface data, deep data, the kind most people never even think to look for. The micro-pause before someone answers a question. The specific way a person shifts a subject when something gets too close to something real. The difference in someone's energy on a Tuesday versus a Thursday. The words they always reach for when they feel uncomfortable. The stories they repeat most often, and what those stories actually reveal about what they believe about themselves deep down. All of it being recorded, filed, and cross-referenced, without the person doing it even being fully aware of how constantly that process runs inside them. By the time an emotionally sensitive person has known you for 6 months, they have built a psychological picture of you that is more accurate than anything you have ever built of yourself. They know which version of you shows up when you are scared. They know what your humor sounds like when you are trying to deflect. They know which compliments you reject because you actually believe them, and which ones you accept because you don't. They have seen the architecture of your insecurity from angles you have never once looked at yourself. And here is the first piece that almost nobody understands. They don't use that information against you. At least, not at first. What they actually do with it is love you more precisely. Because understanding someone's patterns means understanding their pain. And understanding someone's pain at that level of detail creates a quality of compassion that most people will spend their entire lives searching for and never find in quite the same form again. This is the central paradox of every relationship that ever broke an emotionally sensitive person. The very thing that makes them so easy to underestimate is the same exact thing that makes them so dangerous to take for granted. The precision of their empathy becomes, if you are not careful, a resource you consume without ever recognizing where it comes from. You feel understood without knowing what's actually doing the understanding. You feel accepted without realizing how much quiet work that acceptance required. You feel safe without ever asking yourself what is maintaining that safety. And while all of that is happening, while you are living inside the warmth of that understanding, they are doing something that will only become visible much later. They are watching, not suspiciously, not cynically, just watching. The way a patient observer studies a system quietly, completely, without interference, noting every reading, storing every pattern, building a picture with the patience of someone who has learned through years of being dismissed that the truth always reveals itself eventually, and that the wisest thing to do is simply wait until it does. Now here's where the psychology becomes truly important, because everything just described is happening inside a person who is simultaneously carrying an enormous emotional load. Not just their own emotions either, everyone's. If you have ever sat next to someone who seemed upset and felt it physically in your own body before they said a single word, you have a small taste of what this experience actually feels like. Now imagine that happening in every room you enter, every conversation, every relationship you are part of. The volume on the emotional environment is turned to maximum, and there is no dial available to turn it down. That is not poetic language. That is neurological reality. Research on high sensory processing sensitivity shows that the brains of deeply sensitive people literally process stimuli more deeply than average. More neural pathways activated, more emotional memory tagged, more connections made between what is happening now and what has happened before. This is not a metaphor for being caring. It is a genuine physiological difference in how experience is encoded, stored, and felt in the body. Which means that when they are in a relationship that is slowly, quietly, and consistently painful, they are not experiencing that pain the way most people do. They are experiencing it at full volume in high definition, simultaneously aware of their own hurt and the reasons behind the other person's behavior and the history that created those reasons, and the possible future where things could be different, and the growing recognition that the potential and the reality are not moving toward each other. All of that at once, all the time, and still showing up, still trying, still finding the angle that explains the behavior charitably, still choosing to believe in something they can feel slipping through their fingers. Let me describe a specific moment that almost every person who identifies with this has experienced at some point. You are in the middle of something that should feel completely normal, a conversation, a shared meal, a quiet evening at home, and somewhere in the middle of it, without any warning, without any single identifiable cause, you feel it. A kind of knowing that drops into your body like a stone into still water. The relationship is over. Not officially, maybe not even close to officially, but somewhere beneath the surface where real decisions actually form, the decision has been made. Not with anger, not with bitterness, not with dramatic finality, but with a clarity so complete it is almost peaceful. Like when the fog lifts off a road and you can suddenly see exactly where you are and exactly how far you've drifted from where you originally meant to be going. That moment is not a breakdown. That moment is the end of a process that has been quietly running for months, possibly even years. What looks sudden to everyone on the outside has been building with near mathematical inevitability inside a person who has been processing every single data point, every inconsistency, every small erosion of something that was supposed to be mutual, and arriving slowly, by sheer accumulation, at a conclusion that cannot be argued with because it isn't built from raw emotion. It's built entirely from evidence. Here is what makes this shift so fundamentally different from how most people end relationships. Most people end things when the pain becomes unbearable. Emotionally sensitive people end things when the meaning becomes unsustainable. The pain they can manage. They have been managing it all along. What they cannot sustain is the moment they realize the pain is not pointing toward anything, is not building toward anything real, is not temporary discomfort on the way to something genuine. It is simply the ongoing cost of remaining inside a situation that stopped being honest a very long time ago. Once that recognition fully arrives, Something changes in their behavior that the people around them almost always misread entirely. They become warmer on the surface, more relaxed, more easygoing, less reactive than before. And that behavioral shift gets interpreted as progress, as things finally getting better between the two of you. It is almost never things getting better. It is the natural calm of someone who has internally resolved a conflict that the other person doesn't even know was taking place. The war inside them is over. They know what they are going to do. The external peace you are witnessing is not peace with the situation. It is peace with the decision to leave it behind. While this is happening, something else is happening that is even harder to detect. They are withdrawing their energy in layers so thin that no single withdrawal is noticeable on its own. The text they would have sent at 11 at night, they don't send. The detail they would have shared about their day, they keep to themselves. The question they would have asked about yours, they let pass by without asking. They hold back each individual piece invisibly. The cumulative effect is enormous. They are not punishing you. They are not even doing it on purpose. They are simply redirecting an energy that was never limitless to begin with back toward themselves. Because for the first time in a very long while, they are choosing to turn their awareness inward instead of outward. And you, if you are the person standing on the other side of this, will not notice it happening. You will not notice because the warmth they are showing on the surface while this is occurring is genuine. It is the real warmth of someone who no longer needs anything from you. And that kind of warmth, warmth without need, warmth without any hidden agenda, warmth from someone who is already free inside the relationship, while you still believe you are both inside it together, feels like the best version of them you have ever come across. You will think you are finally receiving what you always wanted, just as they are finally letting go of wanting to give it to you. The departure, when it arrives, will feel like a lightning bolt on a perfectly clear day. There were no clouds. There was no thunder. Everything seemed absolutely perfect, except everything you just heard. Except all of that. Except the 100 quiet withdrawals you never once registered. Except the dozen small signals you received but never quite knew how to read. Except the warmth that you mistook for presence when it was actually already the very beginning of absence. And what happens next to you is what most people in these situations were completely unprepared for. Because the loss of an emotionally sensitive person is not a loss like most other losses. Most losses leave behind a gap you can slowly fill back up over time. You build new connections. You find new people who offer versions of what you once had. The wound closes gradually because what you lost was, in some meaningful sense, replaceable. Not this. What you lost when you lost this person was not simply the person. It was the experience of being completely and entirely known, the specific quality of attention they offered, the way they understood not just what you were saying, but why you were saying it, the way they looked past the versions of yourself you showed the rest of the world and chose the real one anyway. That experience does not replicate itself. You can find new relationships. You can find interesting people, attractive people, accomplished people, kind people. What you cannot find, or at least cannot find easily or quickly, is another person who has spent years building precise, compassionate, deeply attentive knowledge of exactly who you are underneath every single layer you constructed to survive this world. That takes real time. It takes a very particular kind of person, and it takes that person actively choosing to invest in you. They invested. They are no longer choosing to. And the world suddenly feels like a place with dimmer lighting, colors slightly less vivid, every interaction slightly less nourishing. You cannot name it. You cannot properly explain it. You just know something important is missing. And you know, if you are truly honest with yourself, you know exactly the moment it left. Now, I want to speak directly to the person who is listening to this and recognizing themselves in the empath. Not in the person who lost the empath, but in the person who did the feeling, the giving, the staying, the quietly bleeding while still choosing to show up with complete presence every single day. I want to say something to you that you may have heard before in different forms, but have not yet fully allowed to settle inside yourself. What you carry is not a burden, it is a capacity. And like every meaningful capacity, it can be directed or it can be drained. Those are the only two options available. There is no neutral ground. For a long time, possibly for most of your entire life, you have been pointing this capacity outward, toward people who needed understanding, toward situations that needed interpretation, toward relationships that needed someone willing to stay when the logical choice was clearly to leave. You have been the person who held the space, the person who could sit with someone else's darkness without ever flinching, the person who always found the explanation that protected the other person's dignity, even when that dignity was not being offered back to you in return. And you did that not because you were naive, not because you lacked the intelligence to see exactly what was happening. You did it because you genuinely believed in the possibility of people. You believed that if you understood someone deeply enough, if you loved them consistently enough, if you created enough safety for them to grow into the version of themselves you could already see underneath all the fear and damage, that it would be worth it, that the person you saw inside them would eventually become the person they showed you. Sometimes it is absolutely worth it. Sometimes people do rise to meet the belief someone held for them. But sometimes, and you know this deeply, sometimes the person you believed in used your belief as quiet permission. Not consciously, not cruelly in most cases, but functionally. Your patience became their ceiling. Your understanding became their way out of accountability. Your capacity to absorb harm without walking away became a reason to keep offering it. And the version of them you were waiting for never came. Not because it did not exist, but because your steady presence made it unnecessary for it to arrive. This is the hardest recognition in the entire architecture of what it means to be someone who feels things deeply. The love you gave was real, the care was real, the investment was completely real, and still it was aimed in the wrong direction. Not because the person was wrong, not because the love itself was wrong, but because a capacity pointed entirely outward at someone who is not growing from it eventually exhausts the very thing that made it extraordinary. So what does redirection actually look like in practice? It does not look like building walls. It does not look like detachment or coldness or deciding to simply stop caring. The people who try to stop caring after painful relationships never truly succeed. They just become numb, which is its own quiet kind of loss. What redirection actually looks like is taking that same precision you have always aimed at other people and turning it toward your own experience instead. Noticing the early signals within yourself that you were conditioned to override. The discomfort in the very first weeks that you explained away with logic. The quiet knowing you had in month 3 that you silenced with reasons. The pattern you clearly recognized but chose to believe was somehow different this time. All of that information was accurate. Your nervous system was reading the situation correctly from the very beginning. What changed was not your ability to read it. What changed was your willingness to honor what you read instead of reinterpreting it generously enough to justify remaining. Honoring your own data, that is the real work. Not the dramatic work, not the version of it filled with therapeutic language. The real, quiet, daily practice of listening to yourself with the same quality of attention you have always freely given to everyone else. Of taking your own observations genuinely seriously. of treating your own comfort as useful information rather than an inconvenience, of recognizing that the nervous system of a deeply sensitive person is one of the most finely tuned instruments in all of human experience. And pointing it inward is not selfishness. It is the beginning of intelligence directed where it was always meant to go first. Because here is the final truth that everything else has been slowly building toward. A deeply sensitive person who has learned to apply their own depth to themselves is an entirely different kind of force than one who has only ever aimed it outward. They still feel absolutely everything, but now they use what they feel as navigation instead of obligation. The sadness tells them something important. The discomfort tells them something. The energy that drops the moment they walk into a certain room tells them something real. And they listen. They act on it. They make their decisions from it. They stop waiting for external permission to trust their own internal knowledge. That version of a sensitive person is not someone you can take for granted. Not because they have become guarded, but because they have become genuinely honest. They understand what they offer. They know how truly rare it is, and they know exactly how much evidence they need before they offer it again to someone new. Not as punishment, not as a test, but as the natural result of someone who has finally learned to extend to themselves the same quality of understanding they have always given away so freely. The relationships that follow this shift are quieter, more spacious, built completely differently from the ground up because the foundation itself is different. The foundation is a person who is not filling a void, not searching for the validation that was once withheld, not mistaking intensity for real intimacy or chaos for genuine chemistry. A person who is choosing from a place of fullness instead of choosing from a place of need. And that quality of choosing, that particular energetic frequency of someone who is fully present because they genuinely want to be, rather than because they are afraid of what might happen if they leave, is something the people around them feel before they can even begin to put it into words. There is a deep groundedness to it, a warmth that does not ask for anything at all in return.